A very good afternoon to everyone. What an amazing gathering here. I'm sure you are all having fun with the two sessions, a lot of learnings. So we continue the next session. Our moderator doesn't need much introduction, but still I'll take that chance. So we have Mr. Ritam Bhatnagar. He's the founder of Indian Film Project. Ritam started Indian Film Project Festival at 21 from his dorm room. From over 600 filmmakers in 2011 to 8.5 lakh creative people across 42 countries. 65,000 creative minds have got together, participated in the film project, and 200 celebs globally. IFP has endorsed by Oscars multiple times. IFP is now an IP creation company working with major brands. It has won India's first Cannes Lions in advertising for PepsiCo. He's also a Lego creator. So Ritam holds a world record in Lego creation, works with brands like Red Bull, Hamleys, Hyundai. Featured by Forbes, third time TEDx speaker, guest speaker at various forums, visiting faculty at MBA colleges. Ritam also consults over 45 companies and runs a monthly sales boot camp. He's contributed to DNA and World Economic Forum's Global Shaper. So that's Ritam Bhatnagar. Our speaker today, Ms. Manisha Kapoor. She's the CEO and Secretary General of the Advertising Standards Council of India. Manisha is the CEO and Secretary General of the Advertising Standards Council of India. She's one of our 4 global vice presidents on the executive committee of the International Council of Ad Self-Regulation, that's ICAS, with over 25 years of experience in brand building, marketing, and consulting for major organizations like Hindustan Unilever, Johnson & Johnson's. She brings extensive expertise in the subject. Manisha actively participates in the development sector. Since leading ASCI, she has transformed the organization into a future-ready entity, collaborating with the stakeholders to protect the consumer rights. She plays a key role in shaping the advertising policies through consultations with regulators and ministries, ensuring self-regulation aligns with the dynamic digital advertising landscape. So without wasting much time, I'll take it over to Manisha and Ritam. We'll kind of welcome them on board. Over to Ritam.
Okay, so my realization for today is that my introduction was too long. It should have been shorter, like mutual fund introduction. You know, the log lines are subject to market risk, which is also something I'll ask you, why they speak at such a fast pace, and why is ASCII not putting a control on the speed at which they should be speaking it about. Jokes apart, Manisha, I was going through your profile for this in a very detailed profile, and to be really honest, I've gone through your Facebook, your Instagram, your LinkedIn, and I also know you're not very active on Instagram, and through all the possible interviews that you have given across. I will start with something which is more personal. You have been into advertising for almost 3 decades now, and probably you started your journey with Unilever as a brand manager. So you would have seen the last part of the good advertising that used to happen or the era which was pre-digital, or in fact in the very television era, and you would have also seen how the current advertising has kind of evolved, or I don't know, probably at the end of the session we'll know if it has evolved or gone for a toss. But we would have seen the entire journey. So could you share across what your journey has been like, and what were the bigger points or the changes that you have seen in terms of values of how ads used to be back then and how they are right now?
Yeah, sure. So I think, first of all, very, very happy to be here and amidst all of you. So when I started, you're going on saying 3 decades, and I know I'm approaching that, so now everyone's guessing my age. But so I think, when I was a young brand manager, advertising was probably the most exciting part of, our lives. It used to be the more glamorous part. We would get to go on film sets and get really great food on sets. Do filmmaking. Then you see the magic at the end of it. I think the process was a very involved one. We spent weeks, if not months, planning what to do. We pored over every word and every line and every full stop and every comma in the ad. And that's how advertising was managed. And once we made it, we would run it for 2 or 3 years, right? And then we would kind of, okay, now we've run this film for 2 or 3 years, maybe we need to make a new film. And I'm sure all of this sounds very ancient
dinosaur
now,
era, yeah,
right? Campaigns are now made for hours, if not days. Who has the time to even go through them? Sometimes, at ASCII, when I look at campaigns that come out in the market, I wonder if anyone in the company has seen them at all. I remember a very respected company and a very senior counsel of that company who came and told us, we caught one of their brands being promoted by a few influencers, and we said, what is this? They're making all kinds of silly claims. And they were so embarrassed because they had no idea that this had gone out. So I'm saying, from a time where advertising was so closely guarded and such deep ownership of it taken, to the fact that today the brand is almost, you've had to loosen the control on it, right? When you start talking to an influencer to make your content, you cannot monitor the influencer the way you could monitor every line of the ad, which went out. So I think it's moved from being very structured to being loose now. Who owns the brand is one of the questions, who's actually owning the brand? Yes, there's a legal brand owner, but who's actually talking about the brand, who's shaping the brand narrative in the public domain is no longer as tightly controlled by the company as it was earlier. And with that come the risks, of it being, risks both to the brand and to the consumers. So that's definitely one aspect. And I think overall in terms of advertising, the sheer number of advertisers you see now, right? Everyone can advertise. Earlier, you had to have a certain budget to advertise, on TV or print. So a whole host of smaller advertisers are coming. Campaign durations are shortening. So it's a completely different world. It's pretty unrecognizable when you look back at advertising and see how fast it's come. And particularly, I would say, in the last 4 to 5 years, the very nature of advertising, what we call advertising, is all dramatically very, very different from the time I started my career.
Okay. So I was speaking to Sanjay sir a couple of days back, and he was telling me that way back in late 80s, when you made a television advertisement, you had to get the script approved by Doordarshan. Then the advertisement was shot. After shooting, the advertisement again went to Doordarshan for a check. Once there was a go-ahead from their side, after all the changes were made, only then an advertisement was aired. So just imagine for a television advertisement to be made, this was the kind of long process. And I'm sure there was also some kind of process for print ads also. To an extent that influencer today can easily pick up a mic, a camera, and create something, speak on behalf of a brand for which they are getting paid, without having any control over the words that they're going to speak, tonality that they're going to represent brand. I've seen some really good brands go down the pipeline because the kind of influencers they hired, they didn't even have the kind of quality that the brand used to put across. From that, I'm assuming that at your time in Unilever and Johnson & Johnson, things would have been still very much into TVC outdoor and print space. And now suddenly to a digital space where advertising is not just about social media, but it is also about performance marketing. It is also about key opinion leaders coming in and putting across their facts. How did you personally grasp up with what's happening? I can understand a Gen Z grasping it up because they have kind of evolved into a digital era. So they know what all loopholes for a platform can be exploited. But I'm assuming for someone who's seen the television days, and now also to understand the smaller nitty-gritties of digital, how has it been personally for you?
Yeah, so it's interesting. I think, the pace at which advertising is changing forces you to be a student for life. If you're not a student for life, you surely kind of, if you don't look at the advertising landscape for 3 months and come back, it'll probably be a very different space. So again, I think as regulators of this space, which is evolving so rapidly, we have had to, really keep our ears to the ground to see what are the changes that are happening, how is advertising moving ahead, what are the formats that are being used, so right from Instagram stories, to where, so advertising also become ephemeral, right? I mean, earlier, let's say if a consumer saw an ad and they had to complain to us, they could tell us, okay, we saw the ad on such and such channel at this time. Now, I mean, how do they even complain to us? I mean, they see an ad and it's gone. I mean, where do they trace that ad again? How do we find that ad? Sometimes we can't, we see ads and we really don't know who these advertisers are. There is really no contact information available. So it is a very, very dynamic world. It's a difficult world. I mean, it's a headache for regulators, for sure. We've had to really up our own game. So right from understanding dark patterns, UI, UX interfaces with consumers, so in fact, if you see the work that we've done over the last 3 or 4 years, it's really been digital forward, right? So whether it was the guidelines that we brought out for influencers in 21, whether it was the work that we did, on new categories like gaming and cryptocurrency, to the guidelines that we just launched a couple of days ago, which is on greenwashing. So it's a lot of work to understand formats today, to understand how long campaigns last. We've now deployed artificial intelligence softwares at our end to trace and track a few categories of interest. So yes, it's been something that I mean, I think even marketeers frankly struggle with what's next, and what's the flavor of the month, and suddenly something is the next big thing. Should you put your money there or should you not put your money there? So it's not easy for anyone. More choices always complicate decision making. And so it's from a finite universe, we move to an infinite universe. And it's tough for everyone, but I think, like I said, there's no choice but to be a student for life if you want to stay relevant and contemporary. So we do that very hard.
So is it like a Tom and Jerry where the brands are trying to find loopholes and then you are trying to figure what a brand is trying to manipulate?
In some cases, yes. I mean, I would not generalize that across brands. I would say by and large, brands want to be honest. I mean, I think there are very few brands who at least deliberately say that let's kind of be dishonest and get away with it. At least in most cases we see the intent is honest. Sometimes there are mistakes made, there are pressures of business, there are competitive pressures where they sometimes do things that they may not have otherwise done. It is our role to point those out, to make sure that they walk the straight line. But yes, I mean, there are brands who I call hit and run brands. And again, because of the digital media, they have more opportunities to hit and run, where you run a particular campaign for 2 or 3 days, just to create some shock or some, you feel that you will get away with it. But I mean, in my own experience, I can say that this is not a long-term strategy. Okay, if you are building your brand only till the next valuation, then you can get away with it. But if you're going to build your brand for the long term, consumer trust does not come when you start cheating consumers. You cannot build your brand on the basis of misinformation, mis-selling. It will not be a long-term brand. And let me tell you, even as recent as 2 or 3 years ago, brands that we saw were doing really dubious advertising, I find that those brands are in such trouble now, because it speaks to the ethics of a company. And if you are not ethical in your behavior, sooner or later, forget advertising, it's the downfall of the business. And I feel that in some way, advertising and unethical advertising is probably a precursor to the downfall of the company itself. I mean, I don't want to take names, but just so many brands where we have pulled up their advertising, and so it's okay if you make one mistake, but if consistently you're making it, it means that you don't necessarily respect rules or respect the law or regulations, and so many of those brands are in deep troubles with their valuations having crashed. So it's not a long-term game at all, but it's for the advertisers to understand that.
So so I'm very curious about something. What does ASCII look like? In the sense, because it's a self-regulated organization, it is not dependent or controlled by government. So it comes out of a common group of advertisers and agencies coming up and saying, what we'll follow what they say, but nothing of that is binding. across. So what does your office look like? What does your day-to-day work overall look like? Are you working in, like, are you more of your efforts going behind chasing those brands who are doing something dubious and then framing regulations, or are you following other global SROs, self-regulated organizations in advertising, and together you are framing regulations which are going to be futuristic? How does that work look like?
Yeah, so we are a self-regulatory body. We are not a statutory body, but it has been formed by the industry to keep themselves in check. Okay, so it's like, for example, you also realize that. I mean, I'll give you another. I'll give you an analogy. Let's say you stay in a housing complex, okay, and you keep your own house very neat and clean. But let's say your common areas, your building entrance, your gardens, your lobbies, let's say full of filth. Okay, what do people think about you then? They're not going to say, oh, their house is very neat. They're saying, that's really not a nice place to live in, right? It's something like that, that your own advertising may be squeaky clean, but if generally advertising is unethical or, something that people have suspicion about, then even if you keep your own house clean, it's not enough. Okay, that if people start becoming suspicious of advertising, if people lose trust in brands, the businesses have no base to stand on. Okay, so that's very important. So therefore, while it is voluntary, we do have a very high compliance. Okay, so over 95% of the cases that we take up, we do get voluntary compliance. In the cases we don't take up or we don't get voluntary compliance, or where we see sometimes there are repeat offenders, right? I mean, you do one ad, they correct it, then you catch another ad, they correct it, and then you see that that's a pattern with some advertisers. Then those are the kind of cases we escalate to the government. So we work quite closely with different government departments, because then finally the full force of law needs to come on people who are not willing to rectify, their errors of judgment or, things like that. So that's one aspect of it. Last year we handled, or this year, financial year, we will end up handling close to around 9,000 ads and complaints that we have looked at. So it's a lot of work. The ASCII engine is constantly running and churning. We have about a 15-member team that looks at only complaints. We have another 3 or 4 people who look at, communication, alliances, etc. But very interestingly, in the last 2 years, we have really been shifting our focus from correction to prevention. And the reason for this is that, again, in the digital age, as I told you, when self-regulation started, it was always envisaged that, there's a campaign which will run for 2 or 3 years. If in month 1 or month 2 we make out that this campaign actually is saying something misleading, we can stop it so that from month 3 or 4 onwards till the life of the campaign, it will run correctly. Right? I mean, those criteria don't hold anymore. So we will still call those out. But the idea is that, can an ad be correctly made? The person who's making the ad, can we move the point of self-regulation to the to the point of ad creation rather than the point of ad publication? So I think those are the issues that we are looking at, and that's important for us to kind of look at advertising and
this happens for national level brands. What about regional brands? For example, a lot of people here are working with brands as agencies, or are themselves brand managers, or are going to be potential brand managers, where they'll be advertising only in a specific geography. So their advertisement might end up in Ahmedabad, say, as a geography. Do you also kind of catch hold of those set of things which are happening in regional languages and regional spaces, if it's not on national TV or national print?
Yeah, in fact, not just regional now. I mean, I think, the whole country also has become regional in a way, right? I mean, now with internet, it's pretty much borderless advertising, right? So I think those are the challenges of today. At ASCII, we do a lot of our own monitoring also. So, we've been, I think in the last year, we monitored over, I think about 150, 200 news publications across the globe, across India. In terms of TV, I think we are monitoring about 400 to 500 TV channels. So there is a whole host of monitoring that's happening. But I think the challenge is that now whatever we do, it's not enough, because the universe, as I said, has moved. Earlier, let's say there were 700 TV channels, you're monitoring 400-500 of them. I mean, now, just look at the number of brand platforms. I can advertise on my own website, right? I mean, I don't even need to go to an advertiser. So I think those are the changes, those are the challenges. We are kept on our toes.
These 9,000 violations that have come in, any particular funny one which has come across? any startling one?
So I must say that, and I was, yesterday I was speaking at MICA, and this was another conversation that came up very interestingly. I feel that people who are in the legal department who have to defend some of these ads are actually more creative than the creative people who made them. I'll give you an example. So we had there's a recent example. So we had a face cream which promised spotless glow. Okay, so we asked for some evidence. So we have a huge bunch of experts who look at the data that is sent by the company. So, so they saw and they said, okay, the data only shows that there is some reduction in spots, but it cannot make it spotless. And so while we were doing all of this, they said कि actually वो हमने spotless का मतलब है that you will spot less spots. Okay, so it does not mean that it will make your skin spotless, but it just means that you will spot less spots. Okay, so as I said, I mean, there is so much creativity in lawyers that is, coming out when they have to defend what the marketing team is doing. So that's one, but yeah, I mean, we have a lot of, interesting cases, some, but this is one of the funny ones which has happened recently. We once got, and some of them very interesting examples also, we get a lot of ads against condom advertising or against lingerie advertising. I mean, that's one of the areas where people are constantly very unhappy. There is nothing in law which prevents these categories from advertising, unless it's a very explicit ad. Then we would, of course, look at it. But so I think those are the slight complexities. In fact, I remember 2 years ago, we released a very interesting report, if some of you get your hands on it. It was called What India Takes Offense To. And it was really a compilation of some of the complaints that we have received. Not necessarily how we adjudicated them, but what were people saying when they were complaining to us. So right from, don't show non-veg, in your ads. So, we are a vegetarian family, we don't want to see non-vegetarian food. So that's one kind of, funny thing that's happening. Also how, again, very interestingly, how men are portrayed versus women are portrayed. And I find there is this huge lobby of men, especially on Twitter, which, I mean, if the ad said anything, even a little bit, something which could be construed that, this is, not necessarily in favor of men, we would suddenly get a whole host of complaints. And there was this big Twitter lobby where, and all the complaints would be the same, I mean, exactly the same wording. So you know that somebody has done it and, so I think men would take high offense to anything that was even suggested that they are less than perfect. So, so those are some interesting cases that we get.
But, while you were mentioning this, I read one of your article where you mentioned about that we have come to an era where we have stopped selling the bikini-clad women and stopped using them for selling products. But we still have a subtext of feminine underlying conversation that a lot of brands are using to sell their products across. And all of us, I think out of 10 ads that we see on television, on Instagram, at least 3 of them would be somewhere targeting the gender divide.
Yeah, so I think, in fact, I would say very overt sexualization, etc., is now not the norm. Okay, you will still find, every now and then a couple of ads, but it's not the norm. And I think people have realized that doesn't work. So that's kind of gone out of the window by and large. However, what we call, normalized stereotyping is pretty much present in advertising. And sometimes it's because we as humans and individuals also don't actually, when we see something, we don't think of it as wrong. I'll give you a small example. Ads or brands that they think we are very progressive. Let's put a man in the kitchen. Okay, but what happens when you put a man in the kitchen? Then the whole family is around that man, even if he's just boiling water for a cup of tea. Everyone is clapping, laughing. What a big thing a man is in the kitchen. So you are, in fact, even more saying what an exceptional thing this is versus normalizing it. Yeah, when a woman is in the kitchen, no one is clapping around, okay? I'll give you another example. Sometimes in ads, they will show, okay, women and professionals, It's only through costuming, okay? You will show a doctor, but what is a doctor doing in the ad? That she's coming home and telling her child how to eat food properly. Or that she's coming home and, saying, okay, this, ye poche mein ye wala cleaner dalo. Have you ever seen a woman in an ad who's dressed like a doctor actually being a doctor? Very unlikely. Or if she's an executive. So it's, So what is happening is that there is, I think, the intent to progress, but we are not seeing beyond, some very obvious, glaring examples. The mainstreaming of this is not happening. This is also to do with the fact that who is making the ad, who is behind the camera. It is still predominantly a male gaze on women. And so there are recent studies which have shown that presence now in Indian advertising is not an issue, in the sense that you will see many ads with women there, having talking roles, doing all of that. But what is the narrative and what is being unsaid is very, very important. But it is a matter of education, learning, going along that curve of learning. So we are very acutely tuned into it. So for us it's a very glaring issue. But someone who's making an ad, making a film, finally what they want to do is to sell their product, may not look at it with that lens all the time. So it's our job also to kind of encourage people to start looking at that lens. There are studies that show that ads which are progressive, in gender depictions or more inclusive depictions, actually have significantly higher brand recall and brand equity and even short-term sales perspective. So actually, if I were a brand manager, I would jump at those numbers and saying, let me make sure my ads are fair, progressive, because it's not only great for society, but it seems to be doing something for my brand. But it's a question of that learning curve, which bodies like us, and of course it's not only our job, and one single body cannot do such a huge amount of reconditioning of society, but everyone who is in this space, right from the UN to the government, it's all our collective efforts, and as aware citizens, to kind of point these out and to see what can be done better.
So almost a year back, there was a jewelry ad where it was shown that two women were marrying each other, and it kind of took the internet by storm. It had protests, and their jewelry showrooms were kind of damaged. Because you were mentioning about progress, the moment we also talk about, say, diversity or inclusion into our advertisements, it also kind of backfires. Probably it might not backfire in a metro town where people are subjected to these kind of content visuals, but typically the moment it goes below a tier 1, there is a lot of backfire that also happens across. Do you think somehow this also stops a lot of brands from taking a bigger step? Because I'll tell you our personal example. A lot of times we get briefs which are very progressive in nature. So the kind of ideas that we kind of pitch are also in the sense about progression. Till the brand manager level, everything is good. The moment it goes to a CMO level for approval, a lot of good ideas, progressive ideas are kind of cut down because of the fear that it might also kind of bring backlash. So do you think that progressive ads will also are also not seeing the right kind of light?
Yeah, and I think one of the challenges in that is because the brand is not committed to that, right? So I think it starts by the brand being committed to a particular cause or a way in which it wants to talk about, or the fact that they want to talk about inclusivity in their advertising. So to me, if the brand is not convinced, it's going to be very difficult. B, if the brand is convinced, they also need to do it consistently. I mean, most brands will do it once a year on Women's Day, or once a year on some day, or something like that. I mean, that is, you are just taking like dhania and sprinkling on the dish, but what is the dish actually? I mean, your dish is full of stereotypes. So that doesn't work, and I think consumers then see the fakeness of it as well. But if you're invested as a brand, it means then you will take the effort to understand the issue much more deeply. You will engage with experts who are in that issue. You will engage with the community that is impacted or that you're trying to put forward. So it is not about, the typical joke that we have sometimes is a group of men talking about women's issues. I mean, a group of, normal people like us or whatever, I mean, that we do not identify with these communities, or we are not from those communities. We are talking about some very deep insights. And how will it not come if you do not involve those communities or those minorities in your thinking, in your filmmaking, in your creative process? So the more diverse are the pool of people making advertising, and how do you engage with these communities to depict them authentically and not showcase them? And I think a lot of advertising also does that, where they are just trying to ride, without necessarily being genuinely committed. And I think that
Very topical in nature. So
yeah,
then-
it is where it's like वो लाके वो showcase में हमने रख दिया है, and you put a tick mark saying that I have done this.
Like for example, Women's Day, we have the highest number of brief which will come across where they'll suddenly want to show a car being driven by a woman.
Exactly. So
Which
what
is-
about the rest of the year? I mean,
Yeah.
women are still driving cars the rest of the year, right? So I think that's the thing that, if you don't invest deeply and you do it at a very superficial level, then at some point it shows through. And then even if there is a backlash, you will then very quickly pull back because actually you were never committed to it in the first place. Versus if you are committed to it. And let me give you the example of, Titan, and we know that they have done several campaigns. And, the film that was taken off, and there was just so much, even though it's a small group of people who are creating a lot of trouble on the internet, the fact is that they had to withdraw it because of a law and order situation. But that did not stop them from, so it's a particular creative that may not have worked for them. But that does not stop them from being on that path. So they've not said, okay, now let us just make very traditional films. They are still pushing the boundaries. You will learn. Again, I think as Ankit also said, you have to be ready to accept that sometimes you may not get it right. But if you're committed to it, then you will find another way to do it. Versus if you're just checking, acha chalta hai ki nahi, let's see, then, the first sign of trouble, you also go back. So that's not then a brand that is truly committed to these progressive thoughts and ideas. So to me, if you're not committed, don't do it. But if you are, then please do it well. So.
Okay, coming to something that a lot of us follow them all the day is a buzzword for last 5 years called influencers. Everyone here is following influencers, has hated influencers for promoting wrongly. And I think practically it's not possible to have a control because there are at least 100,000 influencers in India. People with 2,000 people following them on Instagram and still getting branded work where brands are paying them to speak anything, and because there's no self-regulation for the sake of money, they'll just go out, try to convince them, and because there's a human which is convincing, there's a higher chance that you might get convinced. That's where a significant amount of money is now being poured into influencer marketing. What happens when you get complaints about these? Do you even get complaints about influencers? Because there are a lot of hate comments, and I think a lot of revenge stops there. People would go to so typically I've seen when an influencer is trying to market something very forcefully, the comments where people would be pointing it out and saying that this product is not good. Why are you marketing it? I hate this brand. What happens in that case?
Yeah, so influencers actually form almost around 25% of our work. So cases
Violations.
against, yes, so influencer violations. So it's a big part of our work. I think influencers and brands also need to realize that today's generation, not that they can't spot an ad, most of them, okay, but they don't want to be lied to. So if you're doing something, I mean, all of us know that influencers make money by doing brand promotions. So what are they trying to prove, that they're not doing brand promotions? We all know that, right? But when you disclose that fact, you are seen as authentic. But if you try and hide that fact, then what is the trust that I have on you, right? And you're eroding your own trust. Your audiences follow you because of a certain reason, and if you are, audience trust is like that golden goose that lays or the goose that lays the golden egg. If you kill it, you'll have no trust left, you'll have no followers left. It's still an early stages of evolution of influencer marketing. So, again, you have a lot of people. Again, I think to remember, influencers are not people who are necessarily trained in advertising, marketing, brand building. A lot of them, are just creative people, right? So therefore, again, I think it is the role of the industry, influencer agencies, etc., to make sure that influencers know what is right or wrong. Brands at some point will not go to influencers who are not seen as honest. Okay, they will stop going to them. You will also have audiences deserting influencers who are not honest. So again, I think the question is again this short term versus long term, right? People who are in it for the long haul, people who see this as a worthy profession, would probably not do this. Whereas somebody who says, okay, I just need to make 2,000 rupees pocket money for next month, may kind of do something and then get out of it, but spoil the name for the entire industry. And to me, again, the fundamental thing is that when trust is eroded, it is very difficult to build it back. You can then not monetize it, okay? So if people don't trust brands, people don't trust influencers, then, the business has no foundation to stand on. So that becomes the challenge.
Okay. Another word that you had uttered across, a lot of us will also kind of agree to it, is greenwashing, where products are sold as sustainable, as eco-friendly, as green. And one of a very startling research was that almost 40% products which are sold as eco-friendly, there is no proof, there is no testing which has been done, and the brands are unable to provide a receipt to that they are eco-friendly.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, I would ask how many people in this room, have you ever bought a product because you thought you were doing something good for the environment, or, you would have paid more or chosen a particular brand? Can I just see a show of hands? How many of you would have done it? Yeah. That this is, even if, yeah, thank you. So even if it is, a little bit more expensive, or, if let's say you're indifferent between two brands, but one is saying that it's eco-friendly or planet-friendly, or it has something like that. I mean, you just feel good about supporting such brands, and I think especially with today's generation, they're very acutely aware of, the environmental challenges that are there, and therefore consumers are paying with their wallet, for brands that are in this, promising these things. So it is therefore important that these promises are truthful. I mean, you would feel rather bad if you thought something was recyclable and actually it is not. Or you thought you were buying a product that is recyclable. Let's say you were buying a car that is, I mean, a car cannot be recyclable, but whatever. Let's say you were buying, a bottle of water which said it's recyclable. In the end, you found out that only the cap, and not only the cap, just the ring around which is at the bottom of the cap is recyclable.
Does
so
it happen?
Yeah, it does. So only a small part of the product is recyclable, but you are saying my product is recyclable. So with these guidelines, what we are trying to do is that, see, we don't want to discourage people from talking about their green credentials, because that's an important information consumers use to make choices, right? But please say you're green to the extent you're green. If only a part of you is recyclable, please say that part is recyclable. Or, so broad claims like planet friendly. I mean, if a car claims it's planet friendly, it's silly, because a car is not planet friendly. Most of our products draw from the planet and not give it back. So to give an impression that this has either a neutral or a positive impact on the environment, whereas that is not the case. We've had all kinds of brands, I mean, even service brands, green delivery, 100% green delivery. What does it mean? Someone is using a scooter to come from, your shop to my house. How is it green? Okay, it may be greener. Okay, it may be friendlier. But it is not green or friendly, and there's a big difference between the two. One is an absolute claim, saying I'm green. But if you can say that you're greener than your competitors or greener than your own previous product versions, right? That is allowed. And again, make claims that you can substantiate. If you're called up for the evidence, you must have it. So I think those are some of the key issues that, is our latest guideline that we've released only 2 days back.
Yes, I saw that. And another interesting part that, and I think everyone would be astonished from television, is when we see alcohol brands which are not allowed to advertise, selling music CDs, and we know that Shah Rukh Khan is not selling a music CD there. Somewhere kids are also watching it. People who are not allowed to consume it, typically below the legal drinking age, are also watching it. And even a 10-year-old kid is aware about what is happening there. There's a new guideline that ASCI has come up with, which is the ads to sales ratio for the surrogate products, which across. But do you think these kind of, instead of putting a full stop to it, these kind of things will kind of help, or eventually do you think that someday we'll have to stop them completely?
Yeah, so actually alcohol advertising is a very tricky subject in law. Okay, I don't know if there are any law students here, but so there are two things. I mean, there are two main sets of laws that govern alcohol advertising. Okay, one is the Cable TV Act, okay, which says that no alcohol advertising can be there on TV. But do you know who manages the other mediums? It is the state excise authorities. Okay, so each state has its own laws on what is permitted or not permitted. Okay, so whether a hoarding is allowed or not in some state, whether on-premise advertising is allowed on some state or not. So the law permits certain kind of alcohol advertising itself. The law also permits brand extension of alcohol brands, okay, which means that if I have, let's say, a Kingfisher, beer, I can make a Kingfisher airline, I can make a Kingfisher water or a Kingfisher soda. The law allows it, okay. Now the thing is that when I advertise, a water or a soda or a music CD or a brand, Now, what is the difference between surrogate and brand extension? Surrogate is not permitted by law, brand extension is permitted by law. And very few people know this difference. I think other than the alcohol industry, people like ASCI and the regulators, nobody else knows this difference. Okay, because anyone who sees an ad, the moment it is linked to an alcohol brand ad, you feel it's a surrogate ad, which is not allowed by law. But the fact is all of those are allowed by law. I also want to say that what the law allows, ASCI cannot disallow. Right? The law is above ASCI. That's the law of the land. We are a self-regulatory body. So what ASCI did a few years back was to say that how do you separate surrogate advertising versus brand extensions? And we said that a brand extension is where there is a genuine business. And a surrogate advertising is when there is no business and you are just using it to advertise. So there is a turnover criteria, there is a distribution criteria, and now we have brought an ad to sales criteria to separate surrogate advertising from brand extensions. But it's a spectrum. It is not so clearly understood. In different countries, different mechanisms are used. So the question is, what is the challenge with alcohol advertising, right? One is that you don't want it to be seen by minors. You do not want it to promote overconsumption. And you do not want people who are in vulnerable populations to have that kind of exposure and aspiration to drink, because that may lead to health problems and public health issues. But you are permitting, I mean not in Gujarat, but you do permit the manufacture and sale of something, and you're not permitting the advertising of that. In some countries, advertising is permitted, but that advertising needs to be pre-cleared. So there's like a censor board. It needs to be pre-cleared before it goes. So alcohol really is an extremely tricky subject. I think as ASCI, what we have done is to provide the rationale for why something can be a genuine brand extension which is allowed by law and surrogate which is not allowed. But it's an evolving subject. You now had alcohol companies going into non-alcoholic products. You now have non-alcoholic companies coming into alcohol products. So you'll have a Coke, you have Mountain Dew. These are products that are now going to come into alcohol. So it's a very, very, it's a big gray area. I mean, we have made it black and white to the extent that we can, but from a public perception point of view, when you see an ad, you don't really know whether it is a surrogate or not, because the criteria is sitting at the back end and not at the front end. So yeah, it is a tricky situation, but it is because of a certain ambiguity in law that it's arisen.
Okay, and probably the last question for the sake of time. Political advertising in India, especially this is an election year. I don't know how many thousands of crores are going to get poured, and in a way, probably like alcohol, it's also damaging because it's damaging democracy. People are getting swayed because of fake advertising on digital, of course, rampantly, on outdoor and television as well. Government bodies, ministries, and even political parties make tall claims. And those claims are unverifiable, because until you go to an RTI and get the exact numbers out, they'll just say we did 1,000 crores of something like this. You'll never get to know. How does ASCI play a role in political advertising? Are you kind of allowed, or do you get a phone call from someone saying that please let this ad go? How does that work?
So the short answer to your long question is we don't get into political advertising. Okay, and I'll tell you the reason. See, we are a self-regulatory body. We have been formed by the industry to take a look at its ads. The industry cannot give us the mandate that you look at political ads, because they are not part of the advertising industry or the commercial industry, as it were.
But agencies are involved as a part of releasing, and
they are, but the category as it is not a commercial category. It is so that doesn't form a part of ASCI's mandate. There are countries where the government has given this mandate to the self-regulatory organization. So it's not as if there is no precedent. In the UK, for example, so there is a separate committee that sits, and the process is separate. But our counterparts in the UK are allowed to look at government advertising and political advertising, receive complaints and adjudicate on those. So it's a question of what mandate the self-regulatory organization has in different countries, but I would say the UK is by and large an exception. In most countries, the government has not given its mandate to any body, I mean not just a self-regulatory body. So the thing is that there need to be some checks and balances. From what I understand, I think the Ministry of Information and Broadcasting, which really looks at a lot of advertisements in general, and of course government ads as well, I think is in the process of forming a kind of committee to look at some of the grievances against that. But it's not an area that ASCII is involved in
But
at
do
all.
you get violations related to it also coming as complaints?
Not for political ads. Even if we were to get, we cannot take them because that is not in our mandate. We are not authorized to kind of look at that. So we don't really get complaints, but even if we do get one occasionally, it's not something that we can take a look at.
Okay, we can open it up for question and answer.
Yes, please. The lady here in the second row.
Thanks for the share that you gave, and I actually have two, three questions that I've been trying to put you across.
Please ask them one at a time, because otherwise by the time you reach your third question, I would have forgotten the first.
That's like, as you said, the Rocky and Rani was actually portraying the gender progression. It shows that while all the time the women is being, portrayed in a kitchen, why is not that meal being done on that? And it was quite an insight for that particular movie I would really like to relate with. Now the touch upon, on the loop and holes that we kind of, connected as in the Tom and Jerry game, like advertisers, they try to put it as, taking the advantage of the loopholes that we have in the law and the self-regulatory body. So that is quite an insight again. Besides that, the service providers, I have a major concern with the service providers that you rightly said, because although you do not touch upon the political issues, right? But then we see that a lot of overseas agencies, they try to wash out the national hygiene and the interest of the nation. So why is that the body doesn't look into it? Because you would be having a legal backup as such, from the government or maybe our legal aspects. And besides that, while we are talking of any agency, as you see that it is only in the deliveries that you look after that, they do not play with the emotions or the interests of the mass or the general public. But then if it is on the commitment areas, is the regulatory also looking into what has been committed and what has been delivered to the clients that are paying for that, As Professor D'Souza, he rightly mentioned that advertising is all about trial and errors. Fine, it is okay. But then it cannot be always 100% failure, There has to be some result coming out of it. And if the client who has paid the monies and is not satisfied, is he having some room, to come to the body as in ASCII, and ASCII can, have a support to them? Thank you.
So, thanks for that question. So there could be cases where, let's say there is a product or service failure. Okay, let's say for example, you ordered Domino's and it's not come in 30 minutes, okay, but their ad says 30 minutes, right? The question is whether, so the ASCII code allows for when a product or service is mass delivered or mass, there's mass production, sometimes there could be a miss. But two things. One is if that miss is not a regular feature, so it is an exception and the company is able to demonstrate that, this is, let's say 99% of the cases they could have done, but in a few cases there could have been a miss in the product delivery, then we do not hold the ad as being misleading. Okay? We will still get the company to make up for the product or service deficiency. But we do not then hold the ad misleading. But if, let's say, we, after investigating their records, we find that only 40 or 50% of the times they can actually, deliver what they are promising, and 40-50% of the times they can't deliver, then we would actually take into account that the ad itself is misleading. Okay, that your ad cannot make this claim if your delivery rate is so low. But if your delivery rate is really high, your fulfillment rate is very high, then as an exception, it can be permitted. That does not make the ad misleading in the first place. I think your other question was about overseas advertisers.
I'm talking about the role of the agency who has been providing as a service provider. It is between the client and the service provider. What we have been talking about, the advertising that is being for the delivery part.
Yeah, so that's something that ASCII does not have in its remit, which is the business relationship between a client and the agency. So ASCII's remit is really to protect consumers And there would be other remedies for that, but that's not something that ASCII looks at. So ASCII's primary remit is to look at the content of advertising which consumers can see and understand whether that is honest, non-offensive, it does not encourage unsafe practices, particularly for children. So those are the areas that we look at. Not as of now, not as of now, not as of now. Yes, you had your hand up as well.
Good afternoon, everyone. So, ma'am, before you, Ankit sir came and he told that how he wanted to launch peanut butter ice cream, but it had no scalability. So, what should be done about the products which has no scalability but has a niche market?
You find your niche. I remember when I was in MBA college, someone said, you may have a niche market, but there also needs to be a market in that niche.
Yes,
so,
but sorry to cut you, ma'am, but it has no scalable standards, but still want to find the market where people consume those products. So how should we advertise that? That is the question.
Yeah, so I think it is a question of, what the scale is and what products you're making, what are you selling. So I think that's really a marketeer's kind of role to see whether, you have a worthy product to sell, whether, there is consumer acceptance for that product. And sometimes the products could be small. I think now more with the digital media, you don't necessarily have to be a very large scale to be viable. So I think that is maybe the difference, that today even at a small scale and niche brands can still be viable. I mean, you may not be the national leader and things like that, but you may still be a profitable, viable brand. And I think, with the internet and distribution, which is, you don't now have to be at every store. I mean, you can be in a central place and still be present across the country. So I think those things are making it more possible for niche brands, I think, to be viable more than before. So that's what I would say. Yeah. Yes, sir.
I'm Shivang. Post-COVID, we are seeing that a lot of ads, especially from edibles, food, and to the certain extent, some kind of OTC products, wellness products. They have claims right from boosting your immunity to becoming stronger or taller, particularly to influence the child and the parents. Out of those 9,000 kind of be complaints that what you were referring to, how many were from the health sector, if at all? And there are kind of be cases, at least to my knowledge, that I believe that there was some action or some agitation against some brands making some claims which were not substantiated, or even today currently I'm seeing some edible oil claiming that they've got tocopherol or kind of be vitamin this and that, and it is healthy and it also enhances the taste. So what is the role of ASCII or guidelines if they are existing particularly for the health sector?
So just adding, post-COVID we also had antibacterial genes and antiviral curtains.
Yeah, you had antiviral air conditioners. We even got a mobile app which said that if you download this mobile app, you will get protection. So I mean, all kinds of bizarre claims. But coming back to your point, so in this last year, I don't know whether it should be something we should be happy about or not happy about. Healthcare was the #1 violative sector. Okay, so we have definitely seen, as you rightly said, since COVID times, that healthcare has been steadily rising in ASCII's Hall of Shame, as a sector which is, not doing its due diligence before advertising its claim. And we always feel that both finance and health, are two aspects which are very, very crucial from a consumer point of view, right? I mean, these are areas where you do not wish to be misled, not just from an immediate point of view, but, these are crucial areas where you want honesty in advertising. So healthcare definitely has been a big concern area for us. I also want to let you know, I can understand the brand you're referring to. We have about 40 cases where brands have taken us to court. Okay, because when we kind of adjudicate or our jury, takes a look at that and the recommendation goes out, there are a lot of brands that also take us to court. Some of those cases are in court, because of which we have some limited action, because again, during COVID, a lot of court cases were kind of put on the back burner unless they were of an emergency nature. But yeah, I think we are positive that truth shall prevail. And again, I think this whole thing of who's in this for the long term, we definitely are. So it's only a matter of time. We have seen some recent judgments that have come, speaking very strongly on this issue. So I think it's a matter of time. In the long run, I feel what is truthful and what is what has a base to stand on is what will survive. But yes, in the interim, things may not always be perfect. Yes. Sorry, are we out of time?
One last question.
Okay, yeah. I know I'm standing between you and lunch, so I definitely don't want to.
While she's going for the mic,
Yeah, maybe the one last question perhaps.
competitors also kind of file
Yes,
violations?
you can. So we also accept intra-industry complaints, yes. So you can file a claim against your competitor as well. But anyway, we look at the case on its merit, through evidence, through data, through what is said. But yes, it's not a very big part. I would say about 1 to 1.5% of our cases are intra-industry cases. Yes.
First of all, thank you so much for such an enlightening session. And as you are the alma mater of the advertising industry, only I want 3 takeaways from you. That as a brand, what are the things for it should, like when we create a campaign or an ad, because these days social media is the only key to make startups to boom, for at least for recognition. So what are the 3 takeaways we should take care, like if someone is scrolling, then they should feel, okay, this is a brand, this is not a generic.
Yeah, so I think content is king, now more than ever so. I think to stand out, you need much more creativity. And you need to be a brand that people can trust. It's like if I'm walking down a street and I see a friend of mine, I will stop, right? Although there are 1,000 people. So is that a brand? Is your brand that friend that people want to stop and talk to and listen to? I think that's important. I think that comes from being relevant to, what is the consumer's need at that point of time, where the consumer mindset is. Have you really understood the consumer well? And then, are you an interesting person? Are you an interesting brand? Do you have something to say that I want to listen to? About 70% of the content out there is just clutter. It really is. I think we are, the internet is really a digital dump yard. So, the only way to shine is how, is by being good, is by being relevant, is by saying things in an interesting manner. And all these are really the fundamentals of advertising. It has nothing to do with the digital age, right? These are just fundamentals of advertising, that you have creatives which are compelling, which force you to stop in your track, which say something which is of interest to you. So I would say it's just those fundamentals. The fundamentals haven't changed, even though the formats have changed, the attention spans have gone. So I think the fundamentals need to work harder now, is probably the way I would look at it. Yeah.
So thank you so much, ma'am. Indeed, valuable insights. And in my functional capacity, professionally working with Times of India almost for 15 years. But today I got a deeper understanding on how ASCII functions, so wonderful. And once again, thank you, Ritam. We had a great session today. Before we break for lunch, I'll request everyone to kind of just scan the QR code and please share your feedback. So just spare some minutes, and if you can do the same. Yeah, thank you so much. Thank you, ma'am. Yeah.
Thank you, pleasure being here. Thank you, Ritam.